whakarongo ki te tangi a te korimako. Kōrero flowing out the hooker force. Kaupapa relevant, kaupapa out of bounds, kaupapa exigent, kaupapa paramount. Nā kona whakapiri mai ki te kaupapa tino whakahira hira whakarongo pi kari kari mai. Hare hare mai, o Taringa hare hare mai. We gotta gather up close everybody. Gather up close everybody. Kani move that body. Kani move that body.
Hei ngā toka tū moana, hei ngā toka tū whenua, huri i te ika māo e whakawhiti i te moana raukawa ki te waipou nā mu otira. I ngā moana e kare maira anei te reo o Taringa e whakapāwa tēnei. We have returned and here I am with my lovely colleagues. Erica Sinclair, noroto mai o te whanāpanui.
Kia ora.
And Puaheiri Snowman from a range of iwi within Te Tai Tokerau. I just didn't want to say Ngāpui because, you know.
Yeah.
Engari, noroto mai o Ngāpui.
Because you know.
Did you hear my money?
And we're coming at you from the bustling metropolis of Tawamutu. Nei, under the auspices of Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, anei mātou tokotoru e mihi nei kia koutou katoa.
Tēnā koutou.
And we're at iwi o te Wiki. Nei te iwi o te Wiki, te tangata hei kōrero mo te iwi o te Wiki, engari e mihi nei ki tēnei rangatira, ki tēnei hoa ōku. Jamie, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, tēnā rā tātou.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
And Jamie is with us to speak about, I'll leave that for him. I'm going to throw it over to you, e hoa. Have you got a kiwaha, a saying, noroto mai i tō rahi, and then you can say, ko ai tō rahi, and hea te kōrero.
O kia ora tātou, ko te kiwaa nei, e pai tēnei ki ngā kuia o te kāinga nei, tō mānia uki. This was said quite a lot. Mānia is similar to turi, but when people would stand and sort of be talking for a while, or you know, the kōrero not quite resonating with the hui or the room.
I like it.
Ka karangatia mai rā ngā kuia tō mānia uki.
Tō mānia uki.
Tō mānia uki.
Or they'd also say, kei te mānia haku taringa.
Kia ora.
And my ears are all noisy, so, you know, when you think about your ears being all noisy and there's no kiko to the kōrero, so yeah, tō mānia uki.
Tō mānia uki.
Kia ora.
And another rendering of it was kei te mānia
haku taringa.
Haku taringa.
Yes, and
Kia ora.
We both picked up on that, te Puaheiri. Tērā whakahua i te aku, haku.
Haku.
Yeah, so that's part of North Taranaki in general, and even parts of Whanganui, how Tainui say ngenei, ngena, other places wēnei, wēna. In Taranaki, our paake, our taueke would say hēnei, hēnā.
Kia ora.
Nice.
So e ora ana te aichi I Taranaki.
Oia.
Yeah.
Oe rā rere ngā kōrero.
Raue.
Tēnā koe. So there's a bit of a clue e te iwi. We're in Taranaki and North Taranaki, and ane ko te iwi o te Wiki ko Ngāti Mutunga.
Tēnā tātou.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
Ana kia tahuri ki tā tātai kaupapa kōrero o te iwi o te Wiki. Ngāti Mutunga, kōrero mai, kōrero tia mai. Ko waia Ngāti Mutunga, hua Ngāti Mutunga, wea Ngāti Mutunga.
Kia ora.
I rā kōrero katoa, kei a koe.
Okay, well, ko ngā tungi wenua, ko ngā tungi kōrero Ngāti Mutunga, mai tītoki ki te rau te huia. So our place, North Taranaki, and our tungi wenua from a little pa called Titoki in North Taranaki, just on the southern side of Parininihi, the White Cliffs. And then we extend to another area called Te Rao Te Huia, which is just north of Waitara. And so our iwi descend from the Tokomaru waka, but we also say, you know, heke mai ngā uru waka, so that we come from the Tokomaru and Aotea stock. And then we also say we come from Te Kāhui Tuka.
Kia ora.
Those ancestors being Tukauri and Tukatea. So being sort of people of Aotearoa that were here before the arrival of the waka. And our tupuna, we take our name as Mutunga. He was the youngest of 6. So, you know, carrying on that theme, when we think about Maui, when we think about a lot of our tupuna and our iwi names, Mutunga was the youngest of 6, being the son of Kahukura and Hinemoi. And he was really fortunate to marry a kuia called Te Rerehua,
Nice name.
Yeah, beautiful name. Te Rerehua descends from Rua Putaanga and also links into our Tainui relations.
Kia ora.
And so, when you think about those particular relationships, it's obvious that Mutunga being where we're located north of Waitara, so we're bordered to the north by Ngāti Tama, our relations of Ngāti Tama, very close intermarriages with Ngāti Tama, and then on the southern side, Te Atiawa, and then inland, Ngāti Maru Waranui.
Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora.
And so, of course, being surrounded by those three iwi, there's a lot of intermarriage. And then Ngāti Mutunga, in the olden days, we're part of this karangatanga called Te Atiawa Nui Tonu, which is basically the confederation of Te Atiawa, being Ngāti Tama in the north, Maru inland, ourselves, and Te Atiawa. So that's Ngāti Mutunga, and so we have strong linkages to Taranaki, to the place here, but also that whakapapa up into Tainui through our tupuna kuia Te Rerehua, and then, strong relationships in terms of those connections with Ngāti Maniapoto.
Tēnā koe. E hoa, on a previous episode we spoke to Che, ana I kōrero rāia mō Ngāti Rangi, and he spoke about te kāhui maunga, te kāhui rere. Can you give us a little bit more kōrero about te kāhui toka?
So te kāhui toka is part of the kāhui maunga narrative, right? So when we think about the Taranaki narratives around the arrival of Taranaki, Rua Taranaki to te kūrai o Taranaki nei, to this region, it speaks about our understanding and volcanic activity, so the movement of Taranaki. And from that time to where we are now, there are a number of tribal groupings that came under the karangatanga kāhui. So we had te kāhui maunga, we had te kāhui rua, we had te kāhui rere further south Taranaki, and then te kāhui toka. And each of these particular karangatanga descend from particular ancestors that bear that name. So when we think about te kāhui rua, we think about Rua Taranaki, we think about Rua Tupua, Rua Tawito, heke nei kia mātou Ngāuri. And then from the te kāhui tuka standpoint again, those tupuna matuaiwi being Tokauri and Tokatea, but their connection and their relationship back to the land and the place of Taranaki and the narratives around the arrival of Taranaki and where Taranaki is situated within our landscape here in Taranaki. And so, the autochthones, you'd be familiar with that in terms of the autochthone kōrero being tangata wenua, the fact that when we think about these kāhui groupings, kāhui tuka and kāhui maunga, it relates and traces us back to the land itself.
Kia ora.
And so that's why our tupuna used to say, e rua ngā uarai, being te taha ki te kāhui tuka, te kāhui maunga, and then te taha ki ngā uruwaka, rātau I tai mai ai ki Taranaki nei. So, which is beautiful, because it's our direct link to this land, and there are narratives which speak about, when Tīkorua Māui was fished up, and the narratives on this side of the North Island, ko tahuārangi te waka, kei runga ia Taranaki tērā waka, ko te waka tēnā o Māui mua. And then you have narratives in other places. And so what it is, it's a description of how we see ourselves, how we see our world, and how we're located in the place we are. And that's why I think, the kāhui narratives are wonderful, because it does place us in our landscape. And when you think about, te kāhui tuka, coming from a mountainous sort of place like Taranaki, again, that direct relationship as, a reflection of who we are.
Kia ora. I noticed another kupu that I hear quite a lot I roto ia koutou o Taranaki whānui, o tira o te awa. Te awa tupua, ko tēnei ki kupu te matuaiwi.
Kuia. So, and that concept of matuaiwi is present in a lot of our karakia, a lot of our ruruku. What it symbolises is, it's not the direct line, but it speaks to our foundations, right? So if you think about, ko te kāhui maunga, o tēnei tupuna tō mātou tupuna matuaiwi, it's reinforcing our origins. And so it's just something that's who we are, we often use that. But it's a consequence of, it goes back to a lot of those foundational narratives in a lot of our ruruku and karakia. When you think about ururuku and karakia about invoking or calling for strength, and, you know, the reference to matuaiwi and the connection between those that have gone, or our early forebears and tupuna, right down to ourselves. Again, it's that concept that we are a reflection of our tupuna as they are of us. So, you know, our tupuna are, you know, we are the matuaiwi, nā te mea, ko rātou, ko mātou. You see that thinking, that worldview, throughout a lot of the wakawai, wakataukitanga kōrero of Taranaki. And one of the key statements which relates to our maunga itself is ko Taranaki, ko pauakai, ko kaitake, tō mātou okiokitanga, ko rātou, tō mātou okiokitanga.
Kia ora.
And that's an old whakawai that really came into prominence around the time of Tohu and Te Whiti, but what it speaks to, it's no different to ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au. But the English translation, which I really liked, which was one that Te Miringa Hohaia used often, was Taranaki, Pauakai and Kaitake are a reflection of us as we are of them in life and death. Really deep stuff.
Yes. Deep, man.
It's deep. But, you know, when you think about it, what it speaks to is, you know, I am the mountain is me. You can't separate us. And so we have this deep relationship which goes beyond our present.
O onu.
Yeah. But these concepts are quite simple.
Yeah, tika.
And when you think about these concepts, you know, it's really there to enable us to prosper. Because if you have that mindset, you have that thinking, you view our maunga like Taranaki, because Taranaki is the source of our identity. He's the source of our inspiration. You know, when we're down and out, our waiata, our narratives say, look to te tihi o Taranaki. And it says, you know, kei runga ia Taranaki ngā wai mātau. You know, ngā puna wai. E kore nei me miti. So it's the source of our knowledge systems, all of those wonderful things. And so, you know, we can draw inspiration and strength from our tupuna maunga.
Kia ora.
But it just reminds us of the fact that this is our place. We're not going anywhere else, even though we did travel around New Zealand a bit 150 odd years ago. But it keeps us grounded and provides our foundation.
Where did you guys travel around?
Well, how long have you got?
Kōrero e hoa.
Kōrero.
So Parani would know quite a bit of this. So, I mean, when you think about Ngāti Mutunga, when cousins start to bicker, because Mutunga's wife, Te Rerehua, was the daughter of Hinetuhi, and Hinetuhi's sister was Paparauware, who married Maniapoto. And so, you know, it's not for me to talk about our Maniapoto whakapapa, but, you know, Hine Watihua was the mother of Paparauware and Hinetuhi, and Hine Watihua, her first husband was Tarangore, and that's where Hinetuhi and Paparauware came from, and then she later married Maniapoto and had Tūtaka Moana, where Rangatahi come from. And then, as they did back then, you know, the old husband often marries the wife's daughter, and that's where you get Ngāti Rora. But so that's important context, because, you know, when I think about what happened in the 1820s, it was all part of Ngāti Tō and Tarau Paraha in terms of some of the arguments they were having with their whānau up near Kāwea. But our Ngāti Mutunga narratives speak about the fact that it was Te Pehi Kupe when Ngāti Toa decided, or were driven out of, or were moving on from Kāwea, that they should come to Te Maungahoka. Now, the reason why they looked to come to Taranaki, to Ngāti Mutunga, was they were coming to their relations, because Toa Rangatira is a grandson of Mutunga. So Mutunga had Tuwareti had Toa Rangatira. And so really that sort of 1820 period when Tarauparaha, when Ngāti Toa moved or came to Taranaki, it changed Ngāti Mutunga's world forever. And, you know, there are significant pakanga that took place. One at Okoki at Te Motunui. Te Wero was present there, and that's a whole narrative and story in itself around the events that happened there. And we have our kōrero, Waikato Tainui have theirs, but Te Wero and Waikato Tainui, when they moved from that particular pakanga, Motunui, it's really interesting because later on, in the early 1900s, when Maui Pomare, who is Ngāti Mutunga, was looking to go enter into Parliament, when our people from Taranaki went to seek the support of Waikato Tainui, they recounted that particular pakanga at Okoki and so on. So when Ngāti Tō came down, it changed Ngāti Mutunga's world, because Ngāti Tō stayed at Puke Wakamaru, one of our inland pa, for 2 years to prepare to go further south. And it was in the 1821 period where they came down, which was Te Heke Tahutahuahi. A large number of Ngāti Mutunga and Ngāti Tama then travelled south to Kapiti Island in about 1822, Te Heke Tataramua. And, when you think about moving a large group of people from Taranaki to the Wellington region, and the reason they went was Te Kimi Tēnei Mea Te Ora. There's a bit of pressure from our northern relations around retribution, and of course the balance had changed significantly because of both musket and taiwa. In terms of a new currency.
Yeah.
And so, our people left Taranaki. Some stayed, and then a lot went to Kapiti, then down to Wellington, and then Ngāti Mutunga eventually sort of travelled to the Chatham Islands.
Oh.
Yeah, so here we heke. And it's really interesting when I think about our tupuna, because, what were some of the characteristics that they were demonstrating? I mean, one was they were very much about survival. They were very much about looking for new opportunity, and they were very clear about the importance of those relationships. So, our relationship with Ngāti Toa and the leadership of Ngāti Toa and our other Te Atiawa Nui Tonu people, and so, moving all the way down into Wellington. So Ngāti Mutunga were the first of the Taranaki Tainui groupings to go into Wellington and occupied a lot of the inner harbour pas. And Wellington was great because it was strategic from a trading standpoint with the harbour.
Yeah.
But the other thing, when our people decided to go down to the Chathams, because some of the whānau had been down there and said, geez, it's Club Chatham Islands, it's a wonderful place. Plenty of kai and all of these other things. They didn't sort of quite talk about the climate, and there were some other people already there, Moriori.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because the big hui that they had on Machu Island in Soames in that sort of 1836 period was 1835 before they went down. They had two options on the table. So our tupuna were thinking about going to Samoa.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they thought about either going, they had two options, Samoa or the Chatham Islands.
Wow.
And they ended up going to the Chathams. But when I think about, they were having those hui, it's sort of a continuation of that whole migration and our people being navigators. And I always talk to a lot of our rangatahi about, when I think about the key decisions that our tupuna made in the past and when they moved en masse from Taranaki down to Kapiti, Wellington, and then ultimately to the Chathams, they had a lot of courage and they were explorers, but they could see opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I think about our rangatai, our unga ka witi, for me, what I talk to them about are some of the characteristics that our tupuna exhibited and expressed. So, they were resilient, they were explorers, they were navigators, they were courageous, and they imagined possibilities. And, these are all things that are as relevant today as they were back then. And they had leadership, right? So, and they had confidence and trust and confidence in one another around the decisions that are being made. But ultimately, when I track back around our tupuna and decisions that were made during that quite turbulent period, it was all about kimi te ora.
Yeah.
It's all about the well-being of our people, and it was about survival. And so, so our people en masse to the Chathams, and, what happened on the Chathams in terms of te ringa kaha, and those sorts of things. And then over time, with the advent of Christianity, things changed there. But whilst our people were at, and again, Ngāti Mutunga is an interesting iwi because we had a presence in Taranaki, a presence in parts of Kapiti, parts of Wellington. Branches of our tribe travelled over to top of the south, Te Tauihu. And then we had a presence in Wairakōrē. And then so that sort of 1820 to about 1868, we had multiple sort of tribal areas. But during that period, you had a lot of interaction. And I actually say today, our people were corresponding with one another through letters, describing what was happening. So there was continuous communication, and a lot of our people were travelling, from Taranaki down south, back again. So there was a lot of movement happening. And then in 1848, a lot of our people from that who were living in the Wellington area came back to Taranaki. And that was at the request of Wiremu Kingi Te Rangitake.
Kia ora.
And so Wiremu Kingi Te Rangitake, manu korehi te atiawa, but he also has strong whakapapa links and connections to Ngāti Mutunga. And so when he came back in 1848, he came back because post the signing of the treaty, in Taranaki you had the New Zealand Company operating. So you had, a lot of our lands in this region being advertised in London and other places, encouraging, settlement here in Taranaki. And the consequence of that is that you had more and more settlers coming to Taranaki. Tensions started to grow. You had a lot of confusion around sort of land tenure. So there are a number of examples in our particular region where settlers would come in, they'd transact with some of our people, the settler thinking that he had fee simple title of the land, and then a couple of years later the whānau turned up and say, you can go now. And so, these are just different world views around how we view land and occupation and those sorts of things. But the upshot of all of that, like many other places around the country, was that tensions grew, and then, ultimately what happened is you had the outbreak of war. And the outbreak of war was really a consequence of different ideology. And so that's, Ngāti Mutunga were a big part of when Wiremu Kingi came back, because, 1848, the 1850s were a time where I think Māori all across the country, and you see this up in the Waikato, were seeking alternative avenues to not only bring our people together, but also to arrest some of the challenges that were being placed upon our people. And so in Taranaki, a lot of our rangatira at that time were very wary of what was happening with the increased settlement, land sales, increased occupation. And so that's when we had the Taranaki Land League, and which led up to about 1854 at Manawa Pou, Taiporo Henui. And the catch cry there was tangata tōmua, wenua tōmuri. Which simply put, we're going to die before we let any more land. And, at that time, they swore a number of oaths. And a lot of this was just, I think no different to now as well. Some of the kazis saying, hey, cuz, we don't want you selling any of that land or transacting with the Europeans. And so they had their own aukati here in Taranaki.
Mean.
Yeah, to sort of stop land sales, right? So,
Yeah, ka pai.
And what happens with all these things? One of the kazis, of course, didn't quite follow the instruction. And they'd been pretty clear at Taiporo, at Manawa Pou, that if you don't follow instructions, these are the consequences. And of course, poor old Aori, he got knocked off by his cousin, and then that started an internal feud among our Te Atiawa Nui Tonu. Which, we don't knock one another off these days, but we still have our differences of opinion, which is all good. That makes for a better world. But that sort of led up to the 1860s, and that's when Wiremu Kingi, we had the Peka Peka block at Waitara. A number of our people were living back here in Uranui and the area, and we're very supportive of Wiremu Kingi's position that no more land should be sold. In particular, Peka Peka should not be sold. And on the 17th of March 1860, you basically had the first shots being fired at Waitara at the courtyard.
Kia ora.
And so, when I think about our Mutunga history, we've got the arrival of our Ngāti Tō relations, historical marker with our movement south, and looking for other opportunities. We have Wiremu Kingi coming back here in 1848 as a consequence of the tension between our people and settlement of the region. Then another significant sort of period was the sort of war at Waitara. So we say, ko Waitara te pu o te pakanga, ko Waitara tēnei te rai, mate ai te wenua, mate ai te tangata. So Waitara being very significant as the start of not only the land wars, but also, what followed for generations to come was land loss of life, and for some a loss of dignity. And so we have Waitara. We have, the war that takes place in Taranaki. And, a lot of that narrative of that story is not being told. And I mean, when, Pa burnt down, when gardens and, the mere livelihood of your people is destroyed, the impact that has. But as a consequence of the war at Waitara, we see the emergence of tohu and te whiti and Te Ua Haumene. So in 1865, Te Ua Haumene basically said, ko te haiata tēnei. We needed a new approach. And kia puru i te toto. So wakamoia ngā patu me ngā taiaha ngā pū. So they determined that we weren't getting very far and it was unlikely that we were going to succeed through war. And so we have the emergence of parihaka. And parihaka itself was a direct response to the challenges of that time. And our tohu and te whiti had adopted non-violent action as a means to resist those challenges that were put before them. And of course, the movement at parihaka is really important because in 1863, the entire rohe of Ngāti Mutunga and nearly all of Taranaki was confiscated by the Crown. And so Ngāti Mutunga became a big part of parihaka. So many of our people moved to parihaka, lived there. In 1868, we had a lot of our people from the Chathams return back to Taranaki and also live at parihaka. And from Wellington and all other places. And so parihaka became a place to support our people who had experienced the effects of war, had experienced the effect of muru raupatu, confiscation, and, being very staunch supporters of Te Witi o Rongomai. Now that's important because when we come back to our place here in Uranui and Taranaki, we have a sole marae today. And the reason we only have one marae today is a consequence of that history of, land loss, confiscation.
Ko tahi te marae.
Ko tahi te marae. Ko tahi te marae. And because, with confiscation, the Crown, the confiscation legislation, the New Zealand Settlements Act that was used here in New Zealand was the same legislation that was used in Cromwell Island.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the confiscation legislation is it's called the New Zealand Settlements Act. It's all about settling New Zealand as a colony. So the way in which the Crown did that was they confiscate your land and they put in place the Crown grant system. And what the Crown grant system does, it actually starts to pit brothers, sisters, cousins against one another, because the Crown grant system requires you to attend the compensation court, be able to not only prove your claims to land, but to prove that you were not a rebel, you were not in rebellion, and that you were a loyal native. And so, that caused a whole lot of issues, and then land was returned through the Crown grant system. And very little land was returned to Ngāti Mutunga and to many of our iwi throughout Taranaki. And as a consequence, there were very few reserves. And where our marae is today is one of the few, there were sort of 3 tribal reserves. And that's a 9-acre block was the only sort of collective reserve for Ngāti Mutunga that was set aside. And so we have the one marae. And so a lot of our people were living at parihaka. But when we think about our sole marae at Uranui, all of the kōrero of our marae is connected and related to parihaka.
Kia ora.
And so, the names of our houses, our tikanga, all of those elements, relate to parihaka. So parihaka had another profound effect on Ngāti Mutunga. So one, as a consequence of that history and our people living there, but it also shaped a lot of the cultural understanding, our ways of being and knowing as well. So, in terms of our tikanga, or the kawa of the marae, so many of you who have been to Taranaki will see that we do our oha first, our hariru, our hungi.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of this.
Yep. So a lot of that comes from, when you think about if you do the oha first, or you do the hungi and hariru first, that's that you're coming in peace. And we have a lot of our pohiri today inside. In the olden days, they used to be outside, but our people became very pragmatic, that when you had houses big enough to accommodate people, when you'd spent generations in the cold and the wet and our old people were dying off, it was just probably a better idea and more pragmatic to come inside the house. And more particularly if you believe in the philosophy of tohu and te whiti. So, so that parihaka had a profound effect. So, and the narrative, the parihaka story, Ngāti Mutunga and Ngāti Tama, many of our men were imprisoned in 1879 for ploughing land in our rohe. And again, that was part of that movement to bring to the government's attention the fact that we were not satisfied with the confiscations and the fact that the issues of land, the issues of rangatiratanga, mana motuhaka of our people were not being addressed by the government. And so, Te Whiti said to our people, mātu atu koutou, tura ki nātu ngata taurino o tauiwi, and
Mātu atu atu.
And so our people did. So they went and ploughed land, and we had some real prominent figures at that time. Tarangi Puahuahu was one. He was a key leader in North Taranaki who was just a real strong advocate for the philosophy and the teachings of tohu and te whiti. And, a lot of our men at that time, close to 40, once they were picked up, they were jailed in Otago for 2 years. Now, 1870, so that's important, because when you think about that, when you have a large number of your adult male population leaving,
Right.
or being, what's the impact that it has on our women and the younger generation. And so, 2 years down in Dunedin. Others got imprisoned for fencing in 1881.
What?
And then you have the Pāhuatanga of Parihaka, and which gets a lot of the headlines in terms of when Parihaka was sacked and the details about that. But post the Pāhuatanga, Te Whiti said to his people, to Te Atiawa Nui tonu, hoki atu ki ho koutou kāinga waka Parihaka tiai.
Oh.
So he said, because when you think about Parihaka, yes, it's a place that has historical importance and it's significant. But ultimately, what tohu and te whiti were trying to imbue within the people was to have the confidence, the strength to be who they are and to live and breathe the philosophy of Parihaka wherever they may be. And that's, again, that's a really good reminder and lesson to us.
Kia ora.
About, we can live and be who we are wherever we are. And, the Parihaka piece again, tohu and te whiti actually dissuaded people from carved houses because they said, why carve your ancestors in wood that will rot and decay?
Oh.
Kia ora.
Why not carve them in your minds and your hearts? Because they'll never be taken away. And, their interactions with government and other people, they'd always say, you might take my land, you might take my physical belongings, but you'll never take my soul, my heart, my understanding, my worldview, and, all of those sorts of things. So, that philosophy, so our people, because after the Pāhuatanga of Parihaka, you needed a pass to enter Parihaka.
Oh.
Kia ora.
So Parihaka was occupied by the military. Tohu and te whiti were forcibly removed, and then in order to visit Parihaka, you actually needed a pass. So, that's it. So, right, and there's a number of waiata which speak about the fact that, e hara mātou I te manukura aere te wenua. That they did not have the freedom to be able to roam those areas. Our people came back to Uranui en masse, living at the pā. We had a papa kāinga there. We would hold the 18th Sabbath day of Parihaka at Uranui, and then our houses at Uranui. So we have one house called Mahi Tamariki, which is the oldest house. It's a raupo house, he ware hahaka, used to have a dirt floor,
Cool.
and have ngarahu in the middle. And, visitors to our marae always say Mahi Tamariki. But the actual, the other name for that house was Te Ware Paremata o Tarangi Puahuahu.
Oh, wow.
And Tarangi Puahuahu, being a staunch advocate of the philosophy of tohu and te whiti, our people, a lot of these houses were named for particular kaupapa. So Mahi Tamariki was a house where the young people would be put to work to learn and get an understanding of the philosophy and teachings of tohu and te whiti.
Kia ora.
Tarangi Puahuahu said, well, if Tawiwi can have a parliament, I will have my own, and my parliament is on this place, which is my land and my house. And, we'll make our own decisions as Tawiwi are making theirs. And so it was a place where, waiata, poi, Ngāti Mutunga were very strong on the poi, coming from Parihaka. And, all of these elements have shaped who we are. The poi, tohu and te whiti used the poi as a means to carry the message and to reinforce the understanding of our Māori worldview. So they called the poi he manu, which is a bird, but when you think about a bird, a manu is a messenger. And so I think, the use of the poi as a means of understanding our experience and understanding our worldview, but also being able to share that experience and that worldview was very powerful. And then the 18th, being our Sabbath day every month, was an opportunity to not only reflect on our past experience, but to think about what the opportunities are moving forward. So we have Mahi Tamariki, that house, strong connections to a man that was one of the staunchest supporters of Te Witi o Rongomai at our marae Urenui. The house next door to Mahi Tamariki is Te Aroha o Maui Pomare, ki tanei ui Māori. So Maui Pomare being uri of Ngāti Mutunga. In 1924, that house was built at a time post Maui Pomare being supported by Te Puia and Waikato Tainui to enter Parliament. One of the key reasons why our people wanted Sir Maui to enter Parliament was to progress issues relating to the land confiscations. And so, again, that house, kaupapa based about the fact that Tā Maui's in Parliament and he's seeking to have these issues of confiscation addressed. So that's Te Aroha. And then our dining room is called Te Titoia. So our maunga is often referred to as Te Maunga Titoia.
Yeah.
The Barren Mountain, Titoia, but there is a kōrero from Te Witi o Rongomai which says, ko te Titoia, he puna koro pupu, a hakoa tuki tuki ane te poaka, e kore nei me miti, ka koro pupu, ka koro pupu, ka koro pupu. So it references the wellspring, or the well springs above Taranaki, that will never be defiled. And so the poaka here is a metaphor for government or for anyone that sort of challenges you or tries to upset you. And they said, despite all of those challenges, despite those hardships, the wellspring will continue to bubble forth. And, again, beautiful imagery because it speaks about our maunga, our tupuna. On our tupuna, he's the source of our identity, the source of inspiration, strength. And if we have confidence and faith in our tupuna, no matter what, we're going to succeed. We're going to do fantastic things. And so that's our dining room. So our whole marae, it's all sort of, connected and related to our experience at Parihaka.
Yeah.
And so, when you move forward into the current day, we've been shaped from our origins being te kāhui tuka, te kāhui maunga, being ngā uri waka, so our relationships through tokomaru, Aotea, our location in the world, warfare, all of these changes that have occurred because of technology, moving all around the country, and then, sort of coming back to Taranaki and adopting an alternative way of non-violent action, the philosophy of Parihaka, which is something that's guided us over the last 100 years. And, with all of these things, when you're quite intimately involved with your iwi, is about how do you maintain those elements that make us who we are, and how do we share that? But I think more importantly, how do we inspire our young people?
Kia ora.
And I think that for me is really, how do we inspire our young people to grab hold of these foundational narratives, these stories, which are wonderful stories of success, some not so successful, but just wonderful platform for us.
And what would you say, how would you encourage your rangatahi of Ngāti Mutunga, Aotearoa, Taranaki?
Te hunga ka witi witi.
Te hunga ka witi witi, me ki. What would you say to them, just in closing?
Well, I think it's just, kawe wakama. I mean, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have today, and especially for a lot of our young people, is, to have enough courage not to be wakama. And, it's easy for us to say, but it's hard, more particularly for those that haven't been as immersed in this world. Well, there's that element. But I think on the other side, and we had a wonderful wānanga at our marae a couple of weeks ago for our rangatahi, for our unga ka witi witi, is about providing spaces for them to be able to learn in a way that they learn today. And so, a lot of that is about, how do we provide those spaces, and how do we feed them the narratives of the stories that can inspire them, or, spark that fire within.
Ai, tika ora.
And I think, koera he ua tēnā I he neirangi. Because, there's so much going on in the world, and, we as Ngāti Mutunga, we as Māori, I mean, our big challenge is for our own people to see the beauty in their iwi, their identity, and these places that are dear to them, or that should be dear to them. And that's for me is, I was fortunate to grow up in Urenui with my grandparents at the marae, so that was just our life, right? It was normal. That's not so normal anymore. And so, so you've got to provide safe opportunities for people. But actually, I find even with my own kids, once they get there, to the pa and they see their cousins, and you know, when they learn some of these stories, it's powerful. So yeah, not easy, but hey, we got to keep, you know, mā tātou anō.
Kia ora.
Mā tātou anō.
Tēnā rā wātu koe hoa, ka mutu pia.
Ka mutu pia.
Ka mutu pia, o tēnā no kone.
Yeah. Kāre aku taringa I māniania I o kōrero.
Ana.
Oh yeah, e kupu anō well, you know, karoha, you know, hoku mātua, hoku taueke o te kāinga, ko te nuinga o ngā kiwaha, ko te wairua, he ahua whakaiti te tangata.
Tātou ko tātou.
Ka rongo koe I ngā kōrero nana. You know, it's usually, you know, I tētai hui, ka mea tia mai, te ote rā.
Ai.
So, you know, he's a blow bag.
Yeah, te rā.
Te ote anō tēnā nā, you know, it's, or tō mānia ne, okay, it's all those sort of, you know, koera te wairua o ngā, atu I te kā mutu pia.
Kia ora.
Me te hewa, hewa.
Hewa.
But koera, you know, and koera tētai o ngā mai nui, ko tō tātou reo.
Kia ora.
Me ngā kupu ake o tēnā roe o tēnā iku.
Nā koe.
Kia ora.
He mahi nui tēnā. Ietai wā te wakaarake I he rā kōrero. Ngari, kia kōrero tia he rā kōrero, kia kore e mate. And because, you know, most of those kiwaha and other kōrero have developed and evolved within the context of particular iwi, their environment, their landscape, and their own context.
Kia ora.
And so I think, you know, for me, it's something that I've always been big on. It's a bit like, you know, we say ange'o for o.
Ange'o.
So I'd say, you know, ko Jamie tuta ange'o.
Kia ora.
You know, I aere ange'o ki te hapu kai. So, you know, I think Tairāwhiti, they use awo.
Awo, yeah.
Yeah, but here in North Taranaki, we say nge'o, ange'o. Yeah, aere ange'o ki te hapu kai.
I think Tainui used to use it because it's recorded in the waiata of Tūrongo when he left Kawhia.
Yeah.
There's a line in there. Yeah, o pāna ko angeau.
Ko angeau.
Yeah. So we might have to revive it.
Yeah, so is that, and then the other thing about, you know, Taranaki's got a lot of mita, so our North Taranaki slightly different to South Taranaki, similar words.
Oh, really?
Ai, tika.
So, you know, South Taranaki's like for kua, K-U-A. So North Taranaki, our old people used to pronounce it kwa, like more of a K-O-A.
Oh, yeah.
Kwa aire, you know, and then down south, ku aire. They don't say the A, ku aire.
Yeah, some whanganui's like that too, eh? Some whanganui say the ku for the kua.
Ku aire mai rā rātou.
Ai, tika.
Whereas, you know, kwa aire mai rā rā. It's more glottal up north here.
Yeah, glottal.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that makes us who we are.
Ai.
Koe nā oki. O e hoa e mihi nui atu ana ki a koe. I whāriki rā I ngā kōrero e pāna ki tō rahi, ki tēnā rahi o tātou, ara I tītoke ki te rau o te huia, ka mihi rā ki a koe. Anō he puna koropupu, aha ko tuki ai te puaka.
Kia ora, tēga.
E kore nei mimiti. Nō reira, ka mihi rā ki a koe I te rangatira o ngā kōrero, nei mātou e mihi nei roto I te whakaiti. Mo I whakawāte I a koe, ki te kōrero, I nā kōrero take tūpuna, tatu atu ki tēnei wānei me o tūmanako ki te hunga ka wetiweti me tō tātou reo. Nō reira, ka mihi rā kia koe, Jamie.
Tēnā koe, tēnā rā tātou.
Kāri mānia.
Kāre māniania.
I rā kōrero.
Haku taringa.
Ho tātou taringa.
Ho tātou taringa.
Ho tātou taringa. Pai hoki te kōrero mo nā āhuatanga o te reo ai. Te rangi o te reo.
Te rangi o te reo, koina.
Te rangi o te reo.
Yeah.
So that was mean.
That was mean.
Yep.
And you know, people will say, there's no H's down there. It's like, whoa, there's H's. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's...
just used in a different way.
Yeah, it's a very... Well, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but it's a very shallow way.
Yeah, no, I think so.
Te reo Māori
Tika.
Across all iwi. And I think we've covered it a little bit before. You know, there isn't one thing that defines tarangi or mita
Kia ora.
of a particular iwi, whether you're on te Tairāwhiti, up north, Tainui. Yeah, it's very broad.
Very broad.
And diverse, I guess.
Yeah.
How te reo Māori is used. So I think to our listeners, I think Taringa has brought that to light You know, that you just can't box.
Yeah, and why should you?
And you can't box iwi.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's one of the big, it's a re-learning, but something that's brought to light all the time when we have our kai kōrero
Tika.
for iwi o te wiki.
Yeah, you can see how close the borders are, or actually there are no borders.
Hoi anō, anei te waiata hei tautoko i ngā kōrero a Jamie Tuta, te waiata o te wiki. Whakarongo mai.
Tuku tuku roe mata e Tuku tuku roe mata e Piki ngā poupou Ke piki ngā poupou e Ki roto taranaki Ki reira nei matakitaki Ho tuku tuku roe mata e Tuku tuku roe mata e Mai atu e te iwi e ngā wea tau iwi O tira me wehe kei ngā ronga tikanga ngā tau heke A ngā tau heke O reira e te iwi O reira e te iwi e Kia kaha kia mautonu Hei riro kei ngaro moa ke tonu atu au e tau kiri e Au e tau kiri e Oi taranaki Mai taranaki e Tike tike mai rā tātou Toto i te kawa tapu hapa e ngā tō mana Toro tika ki a rangi e Toro tika ki a rangi e Aue, aue, hei
Kani move that body.
That was cool iwi o te wiki. E kāri i mānea ne aku haku taringa i ngā kōrero o ngā iwi katoa. It's, yeah, you get to travel a bit just by listening.
Yeah, you do, eh? And you just find out all these things that you never, ever, ever would have known unless you talk to somebody from there.
And if you're looking to reconnect, you know, to your iwi, and you might be lucky enough to have your iwi already talked about on Taringa, it's a good place to start. And if you're travelling the country and you're listening to like the tūtohu whenua, you know, the geographical land markings and stuff, you actually start looking at your land in a different way.
Yeah.
Other than the highway. Because, you know, that's how you look at a lot of New Zealand, well, because that's the way you go unless you're lucky enough to go by train, horseback or whatnot, or by awa, by river. So yeah, that's, you get to see it through another lens.
So, te kāhui toka and te kāhui maunga and all the other kāhui that he was talking about, was that, I was a bit confused there, but was that, so were they referring to the original inhabitants of Aotearoa?
Predates the arrival of the waka.
Of Uruwaka.
The Uruwaka.
Yeah, so their hononga to the whenua predates maritime history.
Okay.
It's sort of like, if you look at, there's a range of whakapapa you could look at. For instance, in Mātātua, you've got te hapu one, which predate the waka. So they have a celestial origin that didn't come on a waka.
Okay.
On a canoe.
Yeah.
As such. Yeah. So that's pretty much what it is. There's the kāhui maunga, kāhui rere. There's also kāhui ao. Yeah.
Kāhui,
and Che touched on it, actually explained it.
Go back to Ngāti Rangi. Ngāti Rangi.
Yeah.
Che talks beautifully about.
Yeah, and the differences of kāhui being a more classical word. And then we get into the ati or Ngāti.
Yeah.
Te aitanga, whānau,
Right.
and then Ngāti. Yeah. Anei tātou te kāhui o Taringa.
Kia ora.
E mihi atu nei ki a koutou, I o koutou Taringa, kaore I mōniania, kore rawa, ana I ngā kōrero mō Ngāti Mutunga.
Ngāti Mutunga.
And kua tai tātou e hoa maki.
Te Mutunga.
Mō a tātou kōrero.
I see what you did
Me
there.
matu atu me ngā manakitanga te
Ana. And that's us, e te iwi, anei mātou e mihi nei, hei kona.
Tēnā
Hei
koutou.
kona.
Whakarongo ki te tangi a te korimako. Kōrero flowing out the hooker force. Kaupapa relevant, kaupapa out of bounds. Kaupapa exigent, kaupapa paramount. Nā kona whakapiri mai ki te kaupapa tino whakahira whakarongo pi kari mai. Hare mai, o Taringa hare mai. We gotta gather up close everybody. Gather up close everybody. Kani move that body. Kani move that body.
Taringa, he mea tuku nā te wānanga o Aotearoa, ā nā te māngai pāho I tautoko. To listen to more episodes, search for us on your podcast app and subscribe. Taringa, whakarongo mai.